That's pretty good for most of us. And for those who have come back to tell about it, the journey the soul takes at that moment of death is full of wonder, comfort, and more than anything else, love.
It was very dark at first, but it was beautiful.
This is Grace Babulka. Her near-death experience compelled her to share her experience with others in her book, Beyond This Reality. She also speaks regularly at churches and for support groups.
To me, it was beautiful. It had all kinds of color and sound, and a feeling that I wasn't alone. I was being helped through this darkness towards a brightness that was up ahead that I was incredibly drawn towards. I wanted to be towards that light. I wanted to go towards that light. And at the same time, I was being drawn. I was being attracted, and I was being helped.
People don't describe beings with wings, but illuminated beings who seem to be there in the role of a helper, someone there to guide them through this experience. And so in that sense, I would say definitely that what has been called in the religious tradition for a long time guardian angels do seem to be a reality to people who are at the moment of death.
And what was unusual is I went back and forth through the tunnel several times, and I'd come back and see what's happening, and then I'd go back through the tunnel again. And each time I did, I kind of felt somebody there waiting for me.
And I think the best thing that I learned out of this is that the actual moment of dying is the greatest trip you're ever going to go on. It's a fascinating, wonderful trip.
Many of these journeys begin in a hospital, in an emergency room or operating theater. Such was the case for Grace Babulka, herself a registered nurse and working associate of those who frantically tried to save her life. Her journey began when she had a miscarriage in her 5th month of pregnancy.
In the middle of the night, about 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up with severe abdominal pain and chills and a fever. I took my temperature, and it was 106 at that point. Called my obstetrician to let him know what was happening, and he said to get right back to the emergency department where I worked. By then, my temperature was 107. The nurse showed the thermometer to me and asked, was it this high at home? And by then I was starting to have an irregular heartbeat. My blood pressure was starting to drop. I could feel a great deal of pain, and the fever was just going higher by the minutes. I didn't really think that I would die or even come close to it, but I could hear the monitor that I was attached to, and I could feel the irregularity of my heartbeat. And the nurse on my left-hand side tried to get my blood pressure, and she said, "I can't get it." He tried to get it, and as he was pumping up my blood pressure, there was a very petite nursing assistant who kept trying to wipe me down, get my fever down.
I know what to do, sweetheart. Hang in there.
The resident on the right kept trying to get my blood pressure.
Hang in there.
And then he said,
"Shit!
He said this bad word, and at that moment, I was different. Instead of laying down, looking up at them hovering over me, I was watching them from a position up high. I could hear everything that they were saying, and I could hear it crystal clear. I could understand not only what everybody was saying and what they were doing, but I could also feel what they were feeling. And this had me most concerned because my buddies were frantic. I was trying to get them to calm down. As odd as that sounds, I didn't want them to be upset. All of that pain, all of that suffering was completely gone. And there I was watching them, and the one little nursing assistant kept trying to wipe me down, and the one young physician gave her a shove. And I remember feeling very upset about that, but I knew then that something had happened. And with that moment of realizing that I couldn't talk to them, I couldn't communicate with them, and I couldn't calm them down, I was out of that room. And I was in some type of an enclosure. I could hear a sound like wind or like music or muffled voices, and I had a sense of moving quicker into more of a fullness, more of a sense of celebration. And I wanted even more so to get to this light that was up ahead. It was pure. It was perfect. And what was ahead was somewhere that I wanted to be.
One of the most powerful and life-altering parts of the near-death experience is being in the light and encountering divine beings. The Bible relates many instances of man communing directly with God or with an angelic representative of God. As when Mary was visited by the angel of the Lord and informed that she was to give birth to Jesus. In more recent years, visitors to the world beyond often refer to the divine beings they encounter as simply beings of light. There are visions that stay with a person the rest of his or her life.
When I came through the end of the tunnel, there was a bright, brilliant, beautiful light. A light so bright and so brilliant that I've never seen anything like it or felt anything like it. It penetrated me. It was as though I became a part of it and it became a part of me. As I looked to my right, I saw a being. Then this being started to move toward me. And how this communication was, it was as though I became the being and the being became me. We blended into each other.
I kind of felt somebody there waiting for me. And when I finally saw who this was, I can't say at this time that I ever knew who she was prior to this, but she loved me like nobody ever has. She just radiated love. And when she spoke to me, I could hear her thoughts in my mind instantly as she spoke them. And when she asked a question, she didn't ask one question. Inside each question were thousands of other questions, all separate, all different. And inside all those thousands of questions were other questions, all separate, all different. And I answered them all at the same time, and I couldn't even figure out how I could do that.
Who is the being of light? As Melvin Morse put it earlier, we each have a different conversation with God. Some refer to being in the presence of Jesus. Some prefer to call him Allah. Some are greeted by a guardian angel. But many are convinced that they were in the presence of God.
Without a doubt, what was on the other side of that barrier that I could not get past was God. In my mind, no, I don't even want to say in my mind, in my soul, or whatever part of that is deep inside, that's who was there. That is the God that I always hoped to believe in, but now I know is there.
I lost all sense of any body that I had, and I was pure consciousness in the light, and I absolutely knew the light was God. It was overwhelming.
Well, as a pediatrician who's interviewed children who have seen this God, let me hear you the kinds of things they describe it as. One boy told me that he saw a wizard dressed in white. And this wizard said to him, "Struggle and you shall live." That's a boy who's crazy about Nintendo. Another boy described to me that heaven was a pup tent in a golden field. A third child told me that he didn't go down a tunnel, he went through a huge noodle. I don't think anybody feels those images conflict with their personal beliefs. I don't think anyone can be struck by such images and not be convinced that something important spiritually is happening to children when they die.
It's my impression that people may use words drawn from their religious background and terminology, but that universally people describe the characteristics of this being of light as the same. A presence of complete love and compassion and understanding and wisdom.
Another life transformational impression made on visitors to the other side is that it was a familiar place. They were being welcomed home, and the welcoming included becoming part of the light.
It was the beginning and the end of everything. It was the source. It felt like home. So there was a kind of a memory or kind of a recall that this was familiar to me, and I was familiar to my God. You know, that I was coming back.
That was the feeling. Very comfortable. I was surrounded with love. And I belonged there. I recognized the place. I was in a familiar place. Like I woke up of my dream and I'm home. That's it.
This light didn't hurt my eyes like the flash of the lightning bolt. It penetrated me. It was as though I became a part of it and it became a part of me.
That word being of light is almost too limiting. The light had a source, yet it was everything. It was like being part of this composite whole that was up ahead. This light was so full of every imaginable desire or feeling that you could ever have, and that was what I was attracted to. That's where I wanted to go.
This concept of our having a spiritual connection to God keeps coming up over and over again. Dr. Larry Darcy suggests that some aspect of us is divine. Daniel Brinkley maintains that we are all great and powerful spiritual beings. Grace Babulka speaks of being part of the light. Dr. Melvin Morse, who doesn't even profess to being religious, is convinced this connection is real and that we can see evidence of it in things that appear to be mere coincidence. He drew this conclusion after receiving an answer to an experimental prayer.
I once tried to pray as a little experiment, because a beautiful woman I know had told me that I should try it. And she's deeply religious and I'm not. So I said, alrighty, I'll try it. And she told me I should get down on my knees and just silently ask God a question. So, okay, I did it. And I felt really silly about it. And it lasted about 3 minutes. And I said, I would like to know what the relationship, this is my question, the relationship of man to God. And later that day, I suddenly had a blinding flash of spiritual intuition about a mathematical concept I've been trying to understand called fractals. And fractals are a mathematical concept which state that a piece of the whole is the same as the whole. For example, a snowflake. And you see the shape of a snowflake. If you look at a piece of that snowflake, you see the same shape replicated. If you look at a piece of the piece, you see the same pattern again. And suddenly, it came to me, maybe that's it. We as men are just a fractal of God.
We're all a part of each other in some way, like a woven garment, like a linen cloth woven into thread by thread, running in different directions and bisecting and crossing each other.
But for someone, some other person, that's going to be meaningless. Fractals, they're going to go, what the heck are fractals? You know, and I learned something about faith from this experience as well, because the first thing that happened to me after I had this insight was I thought, oh, this is just some kind of weird coincidence.
It's like this huge quilt that has no end on either side, top, bottom, right, left, front, or back, and every patch of that quilt matters.
I've been studying fractals for years, and I've been struggling in my mind of how to, understand them, and it probably just was a coincidence that that day it suddenly all came together to me. But I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that was a coincidence.
And I just see us all as being one big soul. We're part of this gigantic soul. God, love, whatever, however a person feels comfortable. And each one of us has something to do or to give and to make that love happen.